Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, the early access for Path of Exile 2 released yesterday, and with it a large amount of people have started playing this game, and within this, many people haven't played the first game, Path of Exile 1, and many people have and are staying rigid to their expectations from Path of Exile 1. Either one of these situations could easily line you up to have a little bit of a tougher time in the early game here, mostly just from a knowledge standpoint, as there are plenty of ways to make this experience easier than it is at the default, ranging from just changes to the way that you think while you're playing, all the way to specific practices around gear early game to literally increase your actual stats and make you either do more damage or take less damage just as a default state of your being. I got into Act 2 of the campaign right around 5 hours into my journey, and quite smoothly as well, so today I'm just going to break down some of the things that are either tips to make it easier or lessons that I learned from mistakes I made myself playing the early section of the game. And to be quite clear, I have played the early section of Path of Exile 2 specifically now 4 separate times due to some pre-release events. I'd gotten up to level 25 or 26 at the most recent one that I was at too, and so in that time I have made plenty of mistakes, which means I have also learned a lot about what not to do in the early game as well. First things first then, this is the most obvious one, sure, but I want people to really nail it down as early as possible. Learn your dodge roll and work out how to kite enemies. These concepts are your best friend. Even during early campaign, enemies and especially bosses will have attacks that completely shred through your defenses. Some of them will completely even one-shot your tiny little pitiful low-level health bar. But before you go around yelling about how it's imbalanced this or that, consider the pacing of the game and what it wants you to do. It is slower and more deliberate than Path of Exile 1. It wants you to consider your actions very carefully, and your positioning and movement in combat are extremely important. The dodge roll not only offers a burst of movement to help you get where you're looking to go a little bit faster in the moment, but it has inherent invulnerability frames, meaning if you dodge with the right timing on, like a melee attack or something like that, you can completely negate the damage of this by getting the timing right. This doesn't tend to work on larger telegraphs, as their hitbox duration is longer than the iframes you get for the roll, but a lot of smaller smacks and scratches from bosses can actually be fully avoided by dodge rolling when you see the enemy swinging their weapon. The other concept here is really important, and it is kiting. This applies to everyone, every class in the game, no matter what your build is. Enemies have a physical form, which means you cannot just walk through them or walk over them. If you get surrounded by enemies, you will get penned in, and you will stay that way until you either die or bust your way out by killing enough enemies to make a hole that you can escape from. The way to avoid this, which is far easier either on a controller or with WASD movement on PC, is walking away from the group of enemies while looking at them and attacking them as they trail behind you. This is easier with ranged weapons than it is with melee, but it's possible with both, of course, and the best tip that I have to make this easier is while you can do a lot of attacks while moving, you do slow down while you are attacking. So if you want to be maximum speed, stop attacking. It may feel inefficient, but damage is only important if you're alive, and this applies to avoiding boss telegraphs as well. If you need a burst of speed, stop attacking to get your speed increase and then start attacking when you're safe again. Then next up is another general idea or concept, which is craft early and craft often, as well as taking advantage of vendors. I cannot express how big the difference is between relying purely on RNG drops for your gear and going out of your way to essentially curate it, either through crafting or just watching the stock rotate in between quest completion at vendors to see what they have to offer. Or even if you get an excess of gold, just gambling at Finn in Act 1 will get you a random chance at like a good weapon, as a pretty good example. Modifiers make a big difference to your existence. For the most part, armor affecting survivability modifiers and weapon modifiers affect damage, though that is of course extremely oversimplifying it. The point is though, if you have the option to buy or craft a really strong weapon, especially early game, that should be one of your main goals within the game, as your damage will skyrocket a ton if you get a good one. The main two things that you want to watch out on for weapons as well generally are flat damage modifiers, as adding flat damage is unbelievably more valuable early on, as items work on an item level system where you can see if you hold Alt or the equivalent button when hovering over an item. Generally speaking, the early stages of item level difference, which you can see on the tooltip, will make a very big difference, especially for weapons. You can see here the actual weapon damage and the variance when looking at this. Early game, these numbers will be low. That is the flat damage. So if you add flat damage on top of it through things like pure modifiers or even runes into sockets, which can give you flat damage too, this can increase your power a massive amount early. And the difference in power between an okay magic weapon and a well-rolled rare weapon is very instantly noticeable, and it is very strong, especially if you can also get something like increased skill ranks as well, as those can provide massive bonuses themselves too. On a somewhat similar note then, some of the hardest item slots to fill in the early game will be your rings and amulets, and you can buy these items in town. They will cost you a little bit of gold, but an empty item slot is a lot of lost potential value, so I would recommend picking these up whenever you can. Next up is your second weapon slot and making use of it in the early game. There are a number of ways that you could do this. One of the more interesting is literally just like equipping a shield if you have the stat requirements for it. Having a shield equipped gives you the active block skill, which lets you just counter the majority of incoming damage if you choose to and do it right. If you put this in weapon set 2, you can equip the skill on your bar, and then whenever you press the block skill, you will switch to the shield weapon set. Whenever you use your other normal abilities that don't require a shield, you'll swap back to your main weapon set. A simple but strong early use of this function. Other options are things like if you are playing a monk. Early monk levels can be a bit of a struggle with the quarterstaff, and one way to make this faster and easier is just to equip a bow as your second weapon set. Build a couple of bow skills around it, and play it as if you're a ranger for the first few levels instead. You can then even mix and match ranger and monk skills together that have some overlap and some synergy, but the point is your second weapon set exists, and it can genuinely make your life a fair bit easier even early on if you do use it well. On a similar note to that, but be careful about pigeonholing your damage types too hard early on. Let's say that you like the concept of freeze status and cold damage, so you build heavily into it. It's the only skills that you have put any resources into, it's the only thing that makes you strong, but then you come across a graveyard full of undead that are resistant to cold damage. What happens then? You struggle. It's as simple as that. Obviously, you shouldn't let this stop you from making what you want to play, what seems interesting to you, but be aware that this is a situation you can find yourself in if you tie yourself too closely to one damage type. If you do find yourself hitting this type of wall, then the best thing that you can do at that point is go back to the previous zone, the one right under you, where you aren't hitting resistant enemies, and then farm these until you get a new skill gem or two that lets you expand out into different elements for a little bit, gain a couple of extra skills. This will of course be less of a thing later on in the game. You'll be able to account for it. You'll have skills to cover your weaknesses or nodes in your passive skill tree that might let you penetrate enemy resistances, stuff like that. But this is something that you could come into early that's worth knowing about and how to deal with it. Then finally, just a few more things. First, a very simple one. When doing inventory stuff with like vendors, or if you're disenchanting or salvaging, selling, things like that, you do not need to drag items with your mouse. Instead, you can just use Control-Click, and it will instantly complete the function, simple as that. The other is a bit more of a general piece of advice, and it's something that I've said multiple times recently, but it's really worth repeating. When clearing through the actual maps along the campaign, you can press U to open up your world map. This will show you little skulls representing the major bosses around each zone, and you want to kill these on your way through the zones quite purposefully. Most, if not of all of these bosses, will drop you a permanent upgrade of some sort the first time you kill them, permanent elemental resistance, permanent maximum health bonus, bonus passive points, bonus weapon set specialization points, all of those types of things. They are very important, so you do not want to miss them. But that said, if you try an optional boss that's along the way and it wipes the floor with you, maybe it kills you a couple of times just very quickly, don't feel like you need to keep fighting it until you win. Just remember it's there. Gain some power somewhere else, come back when you feel comfortable to fight it again. The last one then is simply when to sell or salvage items, essentially. Common items are pretty much always sell unless they have sockets or quality on them when they drop. Then you want to use the salvage bench once you have that fully unlocked for these item types, and this is how you get shards of crafting items that will apply sockets or increase quality. For magic items, blues, if they have quality or socket, you want to salvage them again for those reasons. Otherwise, disenchant if you need more transmutation orbs, sell them otherwise. Always identify before you sell an item as well, because you can do this for free at the hooded one once you unlock him in Act 1, and it increases gold value of items if they are identified. For rare items, the concepts are a bit more complex, though usually you'll want to disenchant those for regal shards, though don't feel afraid to just sell one or two if you really need to hit a gold threshold to buy a particularly powerful item before it, of course, leaves the vendor's stock. That pretty much does it for today, and everyone, just a bunch of tips and lessons that I've learned from making all these mistakes myself, with the hopeful intention of making your own journey through the early game much more comfortable, as it can be quite challenging, especially for people new to the series as a whole. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.